Coming up on Tech News Weekly, Jason Howell and I talked to a few folks. First, about the disappearance of social media metrics. Also, about an app that connects massage therapists with clients that is not doing its job of protecting those massage therapists. And last but not least, Section 230. What is it, and what are people doing about it? All that and so much more coming up next. Stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Tech News Weekly, episode 96, recorded Thursday, August 22nd, 2019.
This episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Zapier. Zapier connects all your business software and handles the work for you, so you can focus on what matters most. Right now through November, go to zapier.com/TNW for your free 14-day trial.
And by FreshBooks, the #1 accounting software in the cloud for self-employed professionals and their teams. Make confident business decisions with ease while using FreshBooks. Try it free for 30 days at freshbooks.com/TNW.
Hello and welcome to Tech News Weekly, the show where we talk to and about the people making and breaking the tech news. I'm Mikah Sargent.
I'm Jason Howell. Today we're going to talk a little bit about breaking social media.
Break it in half. Goodbye.
Yeah. Goodbye. We'll see.
Please like and subscribe. If you spend any time scrolling through YouTube, Instagram, or any number of other video-based social networks, you've heard this phrase. Interactions are at the heart of social media, the thing that makes the media social. But increasingly, social media companies are experimenting with, or at least talking about, removing social media metrics. Darren Loucaides is here with us today to talk about his article in Medium's OneZero publication. Thank you so much for being here, Darren.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we are happy to have you here and happy to talk about likes and subscribes and everything in between. So the discussion here seems to surround the motivations between these social media metrics. Are people hitting the like button because they want to see it go up, as Jack Dorsey says, or are they hitting it because they genuinely like the content? Do you see those two as kind of separate things where we have one instance of, oh, this feels good to hit like because I see that little number climb up or I see that little animation? Or are people still genuinely liking things because they like things?
I think it's almost definitely a bit of both. That people see content that they dig and they want to kind of express their approval for that. And it's also true that there's a kind of arms race develops between people wanting to get ever greater numbers of likes, and maybe they feel that if they like certain content, that if they like a certain person's content, that they'll like their content back, and then it can become quite strategic. So I'd say it's, people are still liking stuff because they genuinely like it, but like what they're seeing, but it's not always so kind of free of ulterior motives at the same time.
Yeah, let's talk about those ulterior motives. We do have situations where we tend to lend some sort of officiality, so like credence to things that have more shares and more likes and more replies. And we look at that and we use that as a determiner for, oh, this is popular, oh, this is not. But there's the reverse of that, where when we have this media that's out there and we don't necessarily know, is this something that I can trust? Is this something that I can't trust? And people do use the metrics for that. Do you think that, if social media networks decide, let's get rid of the likes, is that going to interfere kind of with our ability to pick out what's important, or are we just going to find a new way to find what's important?
I think that it's a really good point. I think it would make it difficult for us to see at a glance, which content is the best, which person is kind of regularly showing us the most interesting stuff. And you know, when you're scrolling down your Twitter feed and you see something's got a whole ton of likes, you're maybe more likely to stop and see what they've said. Getting rid of the metrics altogether, you know, it does seem like quite a blunt solution, and there is this big question of, well, how do we know which content is good and bad in that scenario? And I don't have an answer for you. I would just say that the problem with focusing so much on metrics, and for example, the example I just gave of scrolling down my feed and focusing on something because it has lots of likes. The problem with that is the content may contain misinformation. It may have lots of likes for reasons that we don't understand. You know, they may be manipulating the platform and the metrics, finding ways to get lots of likes when that aren't necessarily genuine. So we can't automatically trust those metrics. And I think we maybe arguably put way too much trust into them. It's the number of likes or shares that something have don't intrinsically, inherently tell us whether that content is good or not necessarily. So I think you're going to be, a lot of my answers are kind of going to be that kind of, well, it's a bit of both. There's kind of not that there isn't a clear answer one way or the other to the question of metrics in social media, I'd say. It just does feel that we've got to this point where we're overly focused on the metrics. It's a big sap on. There's this massive incentive on us for us to engage more and more with these platforms, and we have to question the motives behind that, I think.
Yeah, and we find ourselves in a place where where we're noticing more and more that things like disinformation and hate speech and all this stuff can be amplified because of these tools that were never created to amplify this necessarily. They were created for someone to share like their appreciation for a post or the fact that they agree with something. And now, because of this emphasis over the last many years of the more likes, the more important, the more visibility, all that kind of stuff, there's all of this kind of all of these messages that are being amplified that, I think a lot of people would agree it's not healthy for some of these messages to get that sort of exposure. But understanding whether it would actually improve things to like remove these tools actually would require networks to get rid of them to test that out, right? And like I just don't see them doing that unless they know for certain that it would, because their networks are built around that foundationally. Even though Jack Dorsey said, and you wrote this in your piece, something along the lines of regretting moving from the favorite to the like. But I mean, what is really the difference there? And do you ever see them actually pulling the trigger and saying, you know what, this whole foundational piece of our service, we're going to get rid of it because maybe it'll improve things? Do you ever see that happening?
I mean, I don't think that they do need to make this big leap of faith. Just switching off the metrics from one day to the next and see if it works. Cool. Because, they're already testing it out with Twitter's new app.
That's true. Yeah. And
Instagram have tested it as well. So I presume they're conducting these tests to see, how that affects engagement as well as the kind of the health of the discourse. But I think the real question is what effect getting rid of the metrics will have on on the bottom line on their profits.
Right.
And I think that's got to be the big impediment for them to get rid of the metrics or reduce the focus on metrics on the platforms. How do you find a way of how can there ever be a solution which will inevitably reduce engagement on the platform and probably reduce traffic to the platform? That doesn't affect the bottom line. That doesn't affect profits. It's until you can kind of solve that conundrum. I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've thought about with this, how many times has someone gotten a lifetime supply of chicken nuggets or free movie passes for a year or what have you because of this and retweet and all of these different features? There are many feel-good moments, if you can call someone getting a lifetime supply of chicken nuggets a feel-good moment.
It felt pretty good to get those chicken nuggets, I guess.
The first time maybe, but after that I didn't feel so good.
That's right. Day 5 was not feeling very good.
Oh man, still doing these nugs. But it's like every single platform, part of what makes those platforms successful is that most important post that gets shared for the day. I mean, Twitter has a whole section. You hit the little search button and it shows you, oh, everybody's talking about this today or everybody's talking about that today. So are we gonna have the same features available? You've looked at what different sites are testing. Are we going to have those same features available, but we're just not showing the numbers anymore? So I can still like an Instagram post, but just other people can't see how many likes that post has gotten. I can retweet a Twitter post, but I can't see how many other people have retweeted it. Is that where it's going? Or are we genuinely just going to have streams of text and there's nothing we can do with it? We just look at it and then I don't know, I guess I print it out and give it to my friend like Pokemon trading cards. What's the future of these social media companies look like without these social media metrics?
I mean, I think, I don't know, we'd have to ask them that. But I think you could potentially, the platforms could still pull out the best content of the day, but based partly on the platform's own internal metrics, but also just using humans to identify which content is deserves to get more of a platform. I don't see why that couldn't be the case. I don't think it really would work to have content that's getting more engagement show more prominently in your feed, but just the numbers aren't there, because then it seems to me that there would be the same incentive to come up with content that's the kind of content that's going to be the most engaging, rather than necessarily quality content. I mean, I think it's hard to imagine. I think probably the platforms would be way more boring, to be honest, and we would use them less, which I guess is definitely not what Dorsey or Zuckerberg want to hear. But I mean, we should surely be questioning the incentive within the design of these platforms to have us on those platforms all day long. Like that in itself, if Dorsey's talking about kind of promoting a healthier discourse, and Zuckerberg has too, then part of that has to surely be spending less time and more quality time, which to be fair is something Zuckerberg has talked about.
Yeah,
I don't know if that answers your question at all.
I think we have to resign ourselves to the fact that the question is yet to be answered, and we're just going to have to wait and see. Yep. But I hope that people will like and subscribe to you, Darren. I want to thank you for being here with us today. And if people are looking to follow you online, where can they do that?
So probably the best place is on Twitter. If you just go to Darren Loucaides, which is Loucaides. Well, it's written right there. You can find me, and that would be great if you followed me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And hopefully those follow buttons don't go away before you before the show gets published. But we thank you for being here.
Thank you, Darren.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.
All right, I'm excited to tell you that this episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Zapier. Now, growing a business is hard. Yeah, thank you. Zapier. Growing a business is hard. You don't want to be wasting hours every day moving data from emails to spreadsheets to your CRM to wherever you need it to go. Shouldn't all that just happen? Well, Zapier can help. Zapier has over 1,500 plus apps and is the easiest way to automate your work. You can focus on what matters most. Connect all your business software to engage your leads instantly. Automatically import new customers. Notify your team about opportunities. Zapier is also more customizable. Where IFTTT limits itself to 2 steps, it's if this happens, then that happens, Zapier supports multi-step zaps. This happens, then that, and that. It's like popcorn, all the opportunities, all the possibilities. They're virtually endless. You can build the solution you need in minutes. There's no more wasting your time on tasks that you know could be automated, because that's exactly what Zapier was built to do. You just go to zapier.com/TNW. You connect the apps you use most and let Zapier take it from there. Best of all, it's easy to build the exact solution you need in minutes. Trust me, I've done it myself. Without writing code or asking a developer for help, you can join more than 4.5 million people who are saving an average of 40 hours per month. That adds up by using Zapier. Now, I've used Zapier before to tie an Instagram post with a specific hashtag to make sure that if I use this hashtag, it shows up on my Flickr account. But if I don't use this hashtag, then share it to Twitter. There are all of these different ways where you can filter things down into exactly what you want. And that is why Zapier is the premium choice. Now, make more time to grow your business right now through November. You can try Zapier for free by going to zapier.com/TNW. That's ZAPIER.com/TNW for your free 14-day trial. Zapier.com/TNW.
All right. In the gig economy world, Zeel is an online service that primarily connects massage therapists with those seeking their services. Zeel promises a no-tolerance policy for inappropriate behavior. Yet many contractors who find work through Zeel say it's been anything but. Joining us to talk about this is Brian Merchant, author and writer for Gizmodo. Welcome to the show.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
So first, how did Zeel come about?
Yeah, so Zeel was founded in 2010, originally sort of as this hub for alternative medicine services, acupuncture, massage therapy, things that don't fit under the typical establishment medicine. So it was kind of modeled on being a sort of ZocDoc for alternative medicine. But what the founders, who are a husband and wife duo in New York, found was that almost everybody was just ordering massages. So they pivoted in 2012 to this sort of Uber for massage model. And they were kind of the first and biggest to the space. And today they are sort of they're the Uber of the space. There are a couple
competitors. There's one called Soothe that does basically the same thing, and they compete on pricing and quality. And Zeel is by far the biggest. It's doing about 50 to 100 million in valuation right now, and their revenues are estimated to be about tens of millions per year. They've got 11,000 massage therapists on their network, and it is sort of the best paying. Most massage therapists want to use Zeel. Soothe, which is kind of the lift to Zeel's Uber, is a little less expensive. So massage therapists don't make as much money on it, and they if they might book more gigs. But Zeel is kind of the gold standard right now, and the way that they kind of got there is by promising premier, top tier levels of safety. You'll find this in all of the original literature about Zeel. All of their initial sales pitch is based on how much emphasis they put on safety for both clients and therapists, which brings us to this important clause in their terms of service, which is that
they claim that if any therapist or client is made to feel uncomfortable, they can make a report to Zeel, and they have a no tolerance policy. So that client or person will be terminated immediately. So that's what they state. That is obviously very important in attracting a client base, very important in attracting a labor force. So they really, sold this as being sort of on the forefront of what they do. And if you go back and you see sort of the write-ups in places like Cosmopolitan, lifestyle magazines, they all are talking about how Zeel's leading the sort of charge on safety. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like anybody really investigated these claims because, as this story attests, and all of these really brave women who have come forward to share their experiences attest to, it's almost entirely illusory. There is no consistency in upholding their policy. People will complain about very serious charges of, in some cases, what constitutes sexual assault sometimes. And Zeel has, in some cases, simply turned the other way, issued a warning to clients when that's nowhere to be found in the terms of service. There's no warning level. But what I found in this story is that Zeel is routinely ignoring complaints of harassment, sexual misconduct, and worse, in favor of repeat clients who give regular business. Which is obviously problematic on so many levels.
Well, and you talk in your article about, some clientele who, do cross those lines, do go outside of those boundaries. And instead of removing them entirely from the network, it's almost like they're just blocked from that person, that therapist, and then they continue on through the network with no warning to any other therapist, which just kind of boggles your mind when you've got a company that's making the kind of money that they are. Obviously, they have a lot to lose. It's specific in their terms of service how dedicated they are to safety, yet it really is absolutely the opposite. I don't know. Has there been any sort of retaliation? Is there a common thread for those who report these instances as far as that's concerned? What's going on there?
Yeah. So that's a really important point, is that Zeel, they say this one thing, that it's cut and dry, that they'll be banished immediately. And when that doesn't happen, there's no way for other therapists using the network to know. So basically, these predators are allowed to continue to use the service and put other people at risk. And in some cases, I heard accounts of repeat offenders on the network who somebody filed a complaint, and then a few months later, they were talking to another therapist in the network and found that they were sent to the same offending person who should have been terminated and had a similar or similarly egregious offense perpetrated on them. So this is very much putting these therapists at work who are going into hotel rooms, people's homes, private spaces, with only the assurance that Zeel basically has their back in case something goes wrong. I mean, Zeel, it's also important to say, Zeel says that they have this ID verification program. I think the quote that they gave me was that they use the latest technologies, including, AI powered this and that. It was just buzzword stew, to identify threats before they occur. And then I said, well, I have this one case of a therapist being sent to a man who is an admitted sexual offender. He was charged with sexually assaulting a sleeping woman, admitted to a sex crime, and is on probation, and he's using Zeel. When you Google his name, the very first thing that comes up is his charge, his sexual assault charge. And yet this woman was sent there without any notice. So yeah, and when Zeel did sort of kind of comment on that, and they said, well, we do ID verification, we don't do background checks. which is alarming because in the past, therapists who would do sort of in-home work like this would rely on a trusted referral network, health professionals, doctors, chiropractors, people who were qualified to send people that had been vetted in some way, or they would meet them in their offices, get a sense of who this person was before going to their homes. With Zeel, that's out of the equation. So the convenience is sacrificing safety in many cases. And I think it's notable that of the things that Zeel has said in response to your question, they would not answer any of my questions with any specificity. They gave me a boilerplate statement. I followed up. I asked repeatedly to make someone in management available to comment on that. They wouldn't do it. And then, of course, when the story comes out, the CEO it gave a quote to Business Insider that was basically saying, oh, the story included numerous inaccuracies and this and that. And all these incidents they're describing took place prior to 2018, which is when we established this trust and safety team, which is now foolproof and which A, is not true. Some of these incidents took place just months ago. And B, the trust and safety team has not demonstrated any significant changes beyond what the model was already doing. I'm not sure, other than using the word AI-powered technologies, or what they're substantively doing differently at this point. So there's really the same risk today, as far as I'm concerned, of using Zeel as there was before this trust and safety team or anything has come out. And finally, to your point of retaliation, yes, the main source who came forward, she was extremely brave, just the most admiration for this woman who's putting her livelihood at risk by, coming on the record and saying Zeel did all these things to her. She made a complaint after one of her clients masturbated in front of her. It's extremely egregious offense that should have immediately made grounds for termination. But instead, he was given a warning. She found out later. She assumed he had been terminated because he was just blocked on the network. And that's, again, a risk of one of these distributed networks. So if the company can stop him from showing up in her request log, then she has no idea whether or not he's been terminated if he's putting other people at risk. And it turns out 2 years, this guy was allowed to continue to use the service. He was a regular user, a lucrative client. He was given a warning, which is nowhere in their terms of service. When she continued to raise the issue after she saw a suspicious request or two, apparently he had changed his last initial on the account, and it had allowed her to see it again before they realized, and they blocked him again from her. So she raised the issue time and again, and they said, oh, there's nothing we can do. And it's really this astonishing email from their regional community manager where the therapist says, look, this is your terms of service. This was inappropriate behavior. And this is, which says that there's a no tolerance policy. It should be cut and dry. But instead, the community manager is like, well, it's a gray area. There's you can feel free to block anyone you want to. That was it. That was the end. They didn't give her any assurance, any support, anything after this horrifying experience had happened to her. And not only that, but they were continuing to send new clients to this, new therapists to this client. So yes. And then after that, all of a sudden, this therapist's client base disappears. They told her, oh, well, a quarter of your clients have just blocked you. And that means we have to block you from everyone except for prioritized clients. And she said, what? And she started reaching out to her own clients and asked them if they had blocked her. And they all said no. So for me, this is a pretty clear case of like, let's get this person who's, blowing the whistle, who's kind of being a squeaky wheel, as Eileen, the source herself, put it. Let's get her out of the network. It all indicators point to that being the case of retaliation.
Oh boy. Horrifying. I wanted to know, do we see any movement from, Zeel contractors other than the folks that you spoke with? Are we seeing any sort of like organized effort to try and get changes to take place now that, this story is out there, and now that we, despite the company sort of trying to say that this isn't happening, is there an organized effort to enact these safety policies actually, as opposed to, it seems, passively?
Right. So first of all, to your first point, to that last point about the company's reaction has been really interesting. I mean, they're not really denying that these things happen. They say they've got this new team, but they're really threading the needle in such a way that sort of obviously helps them escape culpability, but also doesn't engender any new changes. So from what I've seen, no, the company itself is not taking any serious measures to institute new changes to protect therapists. On the therapist front, that's a really interesting question, and I think it's a really, really important one that's going to factor more front and center into how workers sort of fend for themselves and protect themselves and organize in sort of this evolving, deregulated, decentralized workplace. Because unlike, say, DoorDash, Uber, or Lyft, where you have massive companies that are just, worth billions of dollars, there's enough workers where they have sort of self-organized on places like Reddit or Meetup, where they can share grievances, diagnose issues, sort of do some soft organizing around the workplace problems. Zeel and Soothe and a number of companies that aren't quite that big, that maybe have thousands of users or workers rather, instead of hundreds of thousands, they don't really have these same networks. Even that, it was hard to find people sharing grievances on Reddit. It was hard to find nodes where they could feasibly begin to organize. Some of the therapists I spoke to said that this has inspired them to try to find new venues for doing so. I mean, some of them explicitly said, like, look, this is classic union. We need a union to fight these battles. And it's a little of a unique It's a little bit of a unique situation in that they're sort of better paid, better educated. Than some. They're not as easily disposable. Zeel needs workers with licenses and with insurance and with a history of working in the field. So I'd say there's a real opportunity for Zeel workers to kind of band together and force some of these changes. It remains to be seen how and if that'll happen, of course.
Yeah, it's a kind of a bigger issue, not just around Zeel, but around the gig economy in general. We heard a lot about kind of Uber struggling with this, with the calls for, do you do the independent contractor thing, or do you do the employee sort of model and protect them even further? So, anyways, I mean, it's a difficult article, but you spelled out a whole lot about a company I had never heard about before, and I appreciate that you did. Brian Merchant writes for Gizmodo. You're also the author of The One Device, The Secret History of the iPhone. Where can people follow you online?
Yeah, I'm at BC Merchant on Twitter, and the column that I do for Gizmodo is called Automaton, so you can just Google that and follow along there. And thanks so much for having me. I just want to add that I think this is really an important sort of thing to follow, is how these work structures in these smaller, lower level apps are unfolding, because this is kind of one of the frontiers of the future of work right now. These deregulated, hands-off, on-demand app companies moving into smaller spaces, more niche spaces. And it's hard to say whether or not there's going to be enough of a media uproar over each Zeel or Soothe or TaskRabbit to keep them in check. So we really need to think about how we keep an eye on them going forward.
I completely agree. I appreciate that. Thank you again for hopping on, and we'll bring you back soon. Appreciate your time.
Great. Thanks so much. Cheers.
Take care, Brian. All right, up next, what is Section 230? Why has it become such a big deal lately? I'm sure you've heard of it, but we'll talk about that. But first, this episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by FreshBooks. FreshBooks is awesome. It takes the stress out of accounting for you and your team with easy-to-use billing, expense organization, and time tracking. With FreshBooks time tracking, you'll know at a glance just how long tasks take. With an easy-to-read breakdown of your hours, you can say hello to working more efficiently. We all want that. You just start a timer and get down to business, and when you're done, you'll have an accurate time log ready to pop onto an invoice. Whether you're on the go or browsing the web, FreshBooks ensures your bank every billable hour that you're banking those hours. Knowing how your entire team spends their time will allow you to understand what work has been completed, maybe spot any of those issues before they happen to become a problem. FreshBooks offers an assortment of powerful features as well. So many features. Ability to email, print, or export any of your reports. You can choose your preferred currency, assign project due dates, run profit and loss reports. That's very handy. Fast and easy bank deposits. They have color-coded breakdown of spending and a whole lot more. It's feature-rich. You can stay on top of your business's well-being with FreshBooks. With their straightforward dashboard and reports, your success will never be a mystery. FreshBooks is used and trusted by small business owners in over 120 countries with customer service via phone, email, and live chat. That way you're able to get a quick response to your questions. Visit freshbooks.com/TNW and enter Tech News Weekly in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Do that and you'll receive 30 days free. That's freshbooks.com/TNW and enter Tech News Weekly to receive 30 days free. You may have heard of something called Section 230 in recent months, particularly as platforms like 8chan are shown to be hosting manifestos for mass shooters and all sorts of other things. But Section 230 has been around since the 1996 Communications Decency Act, and it's in the crosshairs. Joining us is Matt Laslo, freelance correspondent for Wired. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on. Happy we can make this work. I know you're on the road, so I appreciate your time.
All good.
You wrote an excellent piece that takes a close look at Section 230 and how changes to it could actually affect the internet as we know it. First, tell us about the inception of Section 230, why it's such a talking point right now, especially.
Well, I mean, you have to go back. This was done in 1996, so that's when Celine Dion and Blackstreet had their song "No Diggity, No Doubt" on the airwaves. So that's ages and ages ago. And if you look at the internet now, I mean, it's warp speed, just light years ahead of that. But the reason it's in the crosshairs now is because this is the law that's basically the shield that's given these internet companies the ability to allow a lot of disgusting, or one might say interesting, content on their sites. Because what the law is intended to do is to say, all right, if you're hosting a web platform, which, again, back in 1996, didn't even exist as we know them today, but it said, all right, if you're Facebook or Twitter and you have a neo-Nazi on the site, you, Facebook and Twitter, aren't liable for what that neo-Nazi or whoever said. So if there's a death threat on the site or whatever, it was intended to be a shield so that these platforms could basically give us the internet as we know it today. But it's now in the crosshairs because all these tech companies seem to keep playing fast and loose with our private data, our user data, which we've seen repeatedly. Most recently, the FTC came down with what many Republicans and Democrats call a slap on the wrist. They got a $5 billion fine for allowing a lot of their users' private data, what users thought was private data, to be sold to third parties, et cetera. So yeah, both parties are really taking aim at Section 230 right now.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, we hear this, especially in the world of technology, when law comes into play, how technology is so quickly evolving that laws that were created years and years ago, for one thing, suddenly don't have, like, there is no, like, they're being applied to modern technology, and maybe it doesn't make as much sense now as it made then in the beginning. Do you think this is an example of that? We're just in a, in a totally politically driven social media world, and this applies differently now, or what's your thought there?
It's to a degree. I mean, it depends on who you talk to.
Sure.
Obviously, the critics say that, but if you talk to Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon, who was the leading progressive Democrat who helped craft this bill with a very conservative Republican back in the day, he still stands by it, but he's willing to accept some changes to it. But he says the law is important because it's the reason that we have the internet as we know it. You know, going back to Zuckerberg testifying last year in front of the Senate, and that big moment with Senator Hatch asking him, how does Facebook make money? Well, we make money through ads, sir. And how do they get those ads? They have our private data. You know, they mine everything that we do. So there's the argument to be made that we don't want to accidentally knock down one domino and then have a million fall. But people are saying that these companies are playing too fast and loose with our data right now.
Yeah. Politically, Section 230 is in the crosshairs of both Democrats and Republicans, but kind of from different angles, right? Where do they each stand on this?
So it's funny. Democrats actually want the tech platforms to moderate more content. You know, they want them to use their heavy hands. I mean, because some lawmakers in both parties say these companies are now no longer just corporations. They're actually countries. You know, they're worth more than some countries, it seems.
Totally.
And they have more power than many countries, it seems. But then you have conservatives coming at it from the other angle saying, hey, we're being censored, which there's no real basis for that. Yeah, there's been some shadow banning of some conservatives. But because you have this kind of myth that's grown out of conservative circles in that Fox News bubble, you now have the White House pushing an executive order to really try to internally clamp down on these companies for what they say is censoring conservatives. But if you actually look on some data, Facebook and Breitbart and Fox News routinely are in the top 10 or 20 slots on Facebook user engagement, all of that. So it's a myth, but it's one of those rare instances there, because of that myth, it's actually brought the two parties kind of together. At least both are wanting to take aim and potentially overhaul Section 230, or at least tweak it.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, and meanwhile, 230, you know, isn't just, you know, being applied to social media companies. Obviously, it applies to papers, magazines, TV stations. They all kind of benefit from this and have for years. Would a change necessarily apply to everyone across the board, or would, like, are you seeing any indication that like a change would be more specific to like internet companies or something like that, because it's been working fine over here, but this is where the problem is, that sort of thing?
And that's kind of the negotiations and the debate taking place on Capitol Hill right now. People don't want to go too far.
Yeah.
And so, in effect, there's become some timidity on this. And part of it is just the partisan gridlock where the two parties are very far apart on what they're intending to do. But also, people don't want to come through like a bull in a china shop and wreck the internet as we all know it. And so they've been pretty close-lipped. There's numerous different groups of senators and House members trying to negotiate compromises on this, but all behind closed doors. And the main six who've been negotiating in the Senate, they try to put a rosy picture on it and saying, hey, at least we're still talking. But they're being very close-lipped about what those talks are. And it doesn't seem like after months and months and months of us reporters standing outside of these rooms, it doesn't seem like they're really getting any closer. And I think part of it becomes your question. Can Congress go too far and really hurt the publishing industry, et cetera?
Yeah. And we won't have to wait too long for this, right? Congress reconvenes in September. You point out in your article that this is going to be a big talking point. This is going to be a big part of discussions once they do reconvene. So what do you see as like the next step? What are we going to hear about this over the coming months?
Gridlock.
Oh, fun times.
I've been a congressional reporter for 13 years now, so I'm paid to be a cynical bastard.
All right, good.
No, I don't know. We'll see. Both parties did get really up in arms after the FTC did what I said previously was just seen as a slap on the wrist, a $5 billion fine for Facebook. I mean, even their stocks fluctuated that day the fine came out, and their stocks at one point that day made them more than $5 billion. So there's talk about reform. It's actually interesting. Republican Senator Josh Howell, a freshman from Missouri, who's really becoming one of the loudest voices on these issues, privacy and data issues, and really going after big tech hard, which is interesting for a conservative. And what he told me in a separate piece I did for Wired, Q&A sit down with him, is he's trying to convince his fellow Republicans to view their data and their kids' data and their grandkids' data as private property. So it'll be interesting to watch him, because the more conservatives he can convince of that position, he might, some of his bills will have to be moderated to get Democrats on board, because they worry that he steps into some First Amendment issues, trying to regulate political bias on the internet from his perspective. So it'll be interesting. I do think he's the one to watch on this, because the more conservatives he can get on board, because mind you, Republicans have been very laissez-faire on the internet for years and haven't wanted to tinker with it. But now that their data, now that their voters' data, now that their kids' data and grandkids' data is being mined in what critics say is abusive ways that users never signed up for, Republicans are more open to it. And so I think he's one to watch. But again, they've been in these talks for months and months and months, and we haven't seen anything.
Right. Well, really appreciate your time covering this for so many years, and your and your perspective, your cumulative perspective on this, for keeping us honest as far as what to expect. But Matt Laslo, contributing writer for Wired, really appreciate your time. Thank you for pulling over to talk to us while you're out on the road.
Appreciate you all.
Yeah. Where can people follow you
on the road?
That's right. Where can people follow you?
I'm at Matt Laslo.
Right on. Cool, Matt. Thank you so much. Have a great trip.
Cool. Y'all have a good one.
All right.
Appreciate
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
All right. Well, up next. Hold on. I'm getting a call.
Oh. Yeah, you should mute that, unless it's really important.
Banana Vacations?
Oh. Banana Vacations. Who is that? Are you going somewhere? Did you ask to be called by Banana Vacations?
Oh, my God, it's a robocall.
Oh, well, okay. Well, then that explains it. I don't know how they knew that we always talk about bananas on this show, but...
Acting! Hey. If you out there are sick of getting robocall after robocall from unknown numbers similar to yours and everything in between, you'll be happy to hear that AT&T, Comcast, Sprint, T-Mobile, Verizon, and several other telephone companies in the U.S. have pledged to fight against those pesky dialers. I do have to note that the entire studio is groaning about that little skit we just did. So thank you all out there for listening and viewing. The agreement is actually a commitment between 51 attorneys general, because that is how you say that, and these telecom companies that, much like the film and TV industry, preempts any regulation put in place by the government. So the idea here is that, the government is likely to move on this at some point, and there are some bills that are in place right now, but just like the TV and film industry, they realized a long time ago, holy moly, we saw how they regulated broadcast, how they regulated these different things. We want to hop on this first so we can show, hey, we've got this under control, and any regulation that takes place after that can kind of be a little bit taken back. Like, we're doing the most that we can so that there's not as much concern for the government to do so.
Right.
I get radio or robocalls all the time, not always from Banana Vacations, but certainly all the time. And it's always like very close to my number, except for one a little bit different, or it's ones that look like they're from my area. And that's actually that's a very specific thing called spoofing. Mm-hmm. And so all 12 of these carriers that are involved in this with the attorneys general are going to be offering anti-robocall tools for free. Which right now I am paying AT&T for an anti-robocall tool.
Right. And does it work well? I mean, obviously Banana Vacations was able to
Banana Vacations got through somehow. They're really slippery.
They're really.
But other than that, no, they usually don't get through. And I take that back, actually. I just remembered this. I forgot. It wasn't too long ago I got an email from AT&T that said, hey, we're offering this premium, because you could get the regular one or the premium one.
Okay.
And we're offering the premium portion for free as well now. So I actually don't pay for it. So I do want to be clear about that. So AT&T has already started to roll out some of these tools. They're all going to also implement call blocking technology on their platforms. So you've got the tools locally, but then you've also got like sort of server-wide or however that works. And then put in a system that labels calls as real or spam. And we've talked about that technology known as stir shaken. And it, like I said, it's specifically going after those spoofed calls. They call from a different number, but they can mask it to make it look like it's your number.
So frustrating.
This will label that. And the big thing here, and the reason why I think we're seeing both sides of the aisle playing ball here, is because this is incredibly expensive for the taxpayer. Because it turns out that one of the top calls that the federal government gets, they get complaints about robocalls more than almost anything.
All the time.
An estimated 1 billion robocalls. There have been 94 actions taken against these robocallers, but every one of those calls costs the taxpayer money. They are stealing people's money. They, you know what I mean, like in the different things that they figure out how to get you. And so it's not good all around. And this is the biggest step that we've seen in terms of the collaborative effort by all of these carriers. So I thought that was a pretty big deal for sure, that we are seeing all the carriers playing ball. And like I said, this is before some kind of big laws move through, hopefully, on the federal government side of things.
To support it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we'll see. The article did say there was no deadline for them to all get it actively in place, but quote, as soon as practical, which never leaves me feeling a whole lot of hope. But
yeah, and I think that I would feel less hopeful about it if I didn't already see that from AT&T, for example. Like I said, they really have rolled this out, and I imagine it costs AT&T and all the other carriers money too. I mean, these are billions of calls that need not take place.
Yep.
And then every time that somebody calls AT&T and says, I keep getting these calls, how do I stop them? That's also money. So there's, unfortunately, because we are who we are societally, money is kind of the driver of change there. And so fortunately, if we could say that, these robocalls cost so much money for everyone. And so companies are wanting to make a move on this. So I wasn't fond of that clause either, that it's like, as soon as it's practical for you.
Maybe someday get around to it.
Yeah.
We'll see. And there is no requirement for the tools to be free. They're encouraging it to be free, and hopefully it will be, because, I mean...
And, well, so this is the thing. The law says that there's no requirement for the robocall stuff to be free. But this agreement that the carriers have done, along with those attorneys general, they say, yes, we'll offer it for free.
That's good. So, from reading into this, T-Mobile, AT&T, and Comcast can all authenticate shaken and stir between each other. I think if they're connecting to networks like Verizon and Sprint outside of that clause, they're not, that like interconnectivity isn't up and running yet. I think Sprint is expected by the end of the year. Verizon already has shaken and stir protocol in place for its own network. So if you're on Verizon, you're calling another Verizon customer, or one of those calls is coming from inside the network. It's coming from inside the network. I think we have a title. Then that would work. But if it's, from T-Mobile to Verizon, that interconnectivity is not in place yet. So definitely still a work in progress as far as that's concerned. But I love to see that they're making this a priority, because, man, so many spam calls. Like, it's not just a few, it's a lot.
And I don't get them anymore. I mean, I do get them, but I don't see them, because I have not only AT&T's blocker in place, but I use a third-party blocker as well, which has filtered out all of the nonsense, except for that one that got through for the joke.
Banana
for the lulz.
It's not a joke, it's real. Banana Vacations, or whatever it's called. That's a real thing.
In fact, they're calling me again.
All right, well, you take that. I got this story of the week. Ever since Android was publicly released, one thing has been certain. The release of the latest version would be accompanied by a tasty treat, a dessert of some sort that the software would be named after. Ice cream sandwich, honeycomb, lollipop, the most recent version, pie. Each release would start life with a version letter and then mature into a dessert that began with that letter once the new version was released to the public. Well, after 10 years, that tradition is ending. Google announced today that it is getting rid of the dessert naming convention and instead going with a straight numbering system, meaning the latest version that should release to the public sometime in the next month or two will simply be Android 10 instead of them trying to find some dessert that starts with the letter Q, which, believe me, we've spent episodes on it all about Android trying to figure out which dessert it would be. But I will say, little feather in our cap, we predicted this months ago. We said, you know what, it's release number 10. This seems like a really great time for Android to like put on their big shoes. And
this is like the person who gets a job at the local froyo shop and they work that job for a while and then they've built their repertoire and they have their education that they need in whatever terms that is, and they start a big person job. And so now they've got to take off the froyo cap and take off the froyo
put on a bow tie.
And put on a doggone bow tie. And apparently the bow tie has a little tin in the middle of it.
Yes.
This makes me a little sad, though. I got to say, I like the whimsy that Apple hardly ever embodies. There's a lot of whimsy and fun with Google. And I'm glad that it's still... I'm a huge nerd for design systems, and so I watched the redesign of the logo and that conversation that they were having about like why it was redesigned. Here's what we've got in place, and that part I love that stuff. And so hearing about how the typeface is more open, and every single one of the little edges of the N is exactly the Android robot's radii. All that stuff is, I love that kind of thing. So there's still some, fun and intrigue and whimsy there, especially, the Android robot is adorable.
They took the bug droid and implemented it as a permanent fixture in the logo, which I think you're right, mark. Keeps a little bit of that kind of the character of the brand, the whimsy. Mm-hmm. It's also a little strange, I feel like.
It's like Android.
To have Android with a permanent robot face that will just kind of like always be there until the next time they redesign their logo. Watching, but they did change the logo. They made the color black instead of green. They standardized some of the colors, like they subtly changed the green to be more readable. Mm-hmm. A lot of this they're doing to make it just more readable, especially on like smaller screen devices. And I think, we're seeing a lot of other companies kind of do this over time. They eventually take a look at their logo and they change it up, and it's almost like they kind of blandize it a little bit more. It's not quite as punchy or as pizzazz. It's kind of a little bit blander. But
we're going to take the Tech News Weekly logo and just a white background, black Helvetica Tech News Weekly.
I was thinking Comic Sans. Are you cool with that?
God. I got to get out of here.
And this was the last show that Mikah Sargent agreed to be on Tech News Weekly. All it took was Comic Sans.
Comic Sans, Papyrus, and
Papyrus.
What's the third one? Lobster? No.
Oh, boy, I don't know Lobster.
Don't bring that anywhere near me.
I'm not familiar with the
It's you
Lobster.
Are familiar with it because I promise you've seen some restaurant use it. But it's I understand that you're not familiar with it.
Yes, okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
Yep, there
That's not one that comes
is.
to the top of my mind, but I see what you mean.
Oh, it's terrible.
Oh, see, now Android L could have been Lobster, and it could have been with this font.
Android Q could have been Android Quitters because they quit on coming up with more. I don't.
Yes, exactly.
I don't know. What is this? Quirabia. What is that?
A shortbread type biscuit, usually made with ground almonds, says Wikipedia. This is the thing. We went through Q dessert after Q dessert, and there was no obvious I feel like the only obvious choice could have been like Nestle Quick or something like that. If you wanted to go with like an Americanized brand sort of thing. Quindish or something like that.
Android quite delicious.
Quite, yes.
It's just whatever.
And then they're in the boardroom, and that's what they come up with. And they're like, okay, if that's all we got, maybe we should just move to the numbering convention. Yeah. So I'm not surprised that they did it.
You can have 10 pieces of candy or 10 pieces of pie.
I appreciate that.
I'm giving you permission.
Yeah, when we had Oreo, when it was Android Oreo, every episode of All About Android, we started by tasting a new flavor of Oreo cookie because there are tons, and you can find them on Amazon. And if they're like limited edition, you can find them on eBay, even if they're like already expired, which we did on a couple occasions.
Oh my goodness!
So every episode we tasted a new Oreo. So I guess that tradition
really
kind of goes away.
Yeah, that's kind of. I mean, unless you just find like tin-shaped things or things that come in tins.
We eat the number 10 in all sorts of different ways.
Yes, you have like baklava fashioned in the shape of a tin. The next time it's cooked cabbage.
Oh my goodness. This is you're giving me great ideas here. I can't believe I didn't think of that first. All right. So, Android, I get it. I understand why you did it, but I'm a little sad too. Yeah. I would completely agree. Tech News Weekly records live every Thursday starting at 11 a.m. Pacific at twit.tv/live. You can be part of the show by emailing us at tnw@twit.tv.
You also have to subscribe to our show at twit.tv/TNW. You can also follow us on social media, Twitter, Instagram, and many other places that may soon be losing their like and retweet buttons.
Wow.
And if you want to tweet at me with all of your tin ideas or anything related to bananas, then I am at Mikah Sargent.
And if you do in fact work for Banana Vacations and you're like, wait a minute, we didn't call him on set, I'm sorry. I'm at Jason Howell on Twitter. Thanks to everyone who helps us do the show, John, Jeff, John, and Burke. And thanks to you for watching. We'll see you next week on Tech News Weekly. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye. Ooh, I like those noises.
All right, so it's coming from inside the network as the title. Did you want to do the tease or the flash briefing? I think you did the flash briefing last time.
I did,
Is
yes.
that right?
So I'll do the tease this time.
Cool.
As soon as I finish gobbling.
I will do the flash.
Hey, welcome to Tech News Weekly.
Oh, yeah,
The podcast where we talk about people
Oh, be careful.
and stuff.
People hate that.